First tonight, we've spent a lot of the last few days talking about Venezuela after US President Donald Trump ordered that dramatic operation to seize President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and subsequently threatened to run the country. Now, though, the focus has switched to Greenland. President Trump has said that acquiring the territory, which is a largely self-governing part of Denmark, is a national security issue for the US, particularly with the increasing presence of Russian and Chinese ships in the Arctic region. The White House has refused to rule out using military force to obtain Greenland, which is far closer to North America geographically than it is to Europe. Well, European leaders are concerned to the extent that 6 European leaders meeting in Paris on the sidelines of the talks about Ukraine issued a joint declaration insisting that only Denmark and Greenland can decide the island's future. Denmark, like the US, is a member of the Western Defense Alliance, NATO. Greenland has previously rebuffed Donald Trump's comments about taking the territory by military force when he first talked about that back in early 2025.
I will say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you.
For det første, så mener jeg, at man skal tage den amerikanske præsident alvorligt.
I believe that the US president should be taken seriously when he says that he wants Greenland. But I also want to make it clear that if the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That is, including our NATO and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War. I agree that it is important that there is security and peace and security in the Arctic region. That is one of the reasons why we are in NATO. Greenland is also a member of NATO. It is a shared responsibility of the Arctic states, including the Kingdom, to ensure that there is security, peace and freedom in the Arctic region. But Denmark has always been a good ally of the United States. We want to continue to be so. But I also have to address that some of what is being said from the American side. And of course, we will not accept a situation where we and Greenland are threatened in this way.
Os og Grønland på den her måde.
The Danish Prime Minister there, and before her, the American President, will cross live to the US in a minute to get more on that story. But first, Beijing has accused Washington of threatening global energy security after President Trump said the interim authorities in Venezuela would turn over up to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States. China is the leading customer of Venezuelan crude. Mr. Trump has said the oil will be sold to benefit both Venezuelans and Americans, but the money raised will be controlled by him. Meanwhile, US officials say Russia sent a submarine and other naval assets to escort an empty oil tanker while it was being pursued by US forces who suspected of breaking oil sanctions. The ship, which has historically transported Venezuelan crude oil, is now being seized by the US in the North Atlantic between Iceland and the British Isles. The US has also seized a second tanker in the Caribbean Sea that's linked to Venezuela.
On Venezuela being an important partner for China in oil production and supply chains, and whether China sees a direct threat to stability of international energy cooperation, Mandarin, the United States has long imposed illegal unilateral sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, and recently even brazenly used force against Venezuela, severely disrupting Venezuela's economic and social order and threatening the stability of global supply chains. China has strongly condemned this. I want to emphasize that the cooperation between China and Venezuela is cooperation between sovereign states and is protected by international law and the laws of both countries.
Well, for more on all those stories, I'm joined now on the line from New York by Arise Special Correspondent James Blue. Good to see you. James. We're going to talk about Venezuela in a moment, but first let's talk about Greenland. Is the Trump administration really threatening to invade Greenland if Denmark doesn't hand it over voluntarily?
I think the United States is really planning to add Greenland to the U.S. sort of, the U.S. sphere. And, I think one of the things that the piece mentioned is that Greenland is already a part of NATO. Greenland is already sort of in the fold. And what President Trump and what his team are increasingly asserting that the resources of Greenland, its strategic location, and sort of what it delivers and offers are things that the US would like to have within its own purview. And I think the issue that's being discussed is that perhaps the US would plan to actually seize it if using the military if possible and if necessary. And several members of the Trump administration have said that that could happen. And I think it's all part of a ploy to try to get Denmark to find some way to sort of capitulate and just sort of make the country available. There is a very large and very important U.S. military base already on Greenland. And so, in a way, the U.S. has a stronghold there that, in some ways, I think it could be. The basis for some type of compromise. Could Greenland and could Denmark give that base more power, more access to things? At the end of the day, Charles, this really comes down to resources. Greenland is really packed with the types of resources the U.S. needs and wants for the AI industry, for the mobile phone industry, for the building of weapons. And so it's really a play to get a strategic asset, both in its location in the sort of North Arctic and its resources that it has. And yes, there is a palpable sense that the US government has decided and is announcing that they are willing to go to war in order to seize this territory and seize this land. And part of it, one of the president's chief advisors basically said, who's going to stand up and do something against us, thinking that the U.S. is just all powerful and therefore will for sure be able to secure it if it wants it.
Well, I'm glad you actually explained the strategic importance of Greenland to the US, because, a lot of people are wondering what the big deal is. Greenland is the most sparsely populated territory in the world with one of the harshest climates, and 80% of it is covered in ice. But beyond military action, because we've got to gallop ahead here, we're running out of time, there are other options that the US is looking at with regard to Greenland, aren't there? Because Secretary of State Marco Rubio told lawmakers on Capitol Hill that the US wanted to buy Greenland from Denmark in preference to invading it. And another US official was quoted as saying that another option was forming a compact of free association. In other words, a close security alliance with Greenland.
Yeah, and I think all of those are being floated. And what they're doing is they're sort of testing what will actually work. And, you have the sort of real time, what can we actually get across the line? And I think this is going to continue for a few days. And, given all the activity, all the action, both military and certainly diplomatic that's going on right now. We are seeing an expression of U.S. force and U.S. might that we have not seen in a long time. And so one of the things that I think is really really indicative of the sort of place and the positioning that the US feels they have now. They are laying out future plans. They have talked about possibly going after Cuba, possibly going after Colombia, and very concretely spoken about going after Greenland, which is a protectorate of Denmark. And so their confidence, the success of the Maduro capture and movement to New York has really given them some strength that allows them to sort of say, these are the other things that we're going to do. Stand back, stand by, and please get out of our way.
Well, let's turn to Venezuela, James, and President Trump saying that the interim authorities in Caracas will be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of what he called sanctioned oil to the United States. Mr. Trump said the oil would be sold at market price and the money raised would be controlled by him. But earlier, Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, said no foreign actor would be running her country and the government in Caracas remains in charge. What's going on there?
Well, I think what's going on is that you have two very different versions of reality, one for the world and international audiences, and one for local audiences in Venezuela. I do believe, and I am told, that the Americans are getting the cooperation that they hope to get from the interim president, and that any of the sort of rhetoric that she shares with sort of the local domestic audience is all about trying to maintain stability. And so there remains a belief that they can work with her, that they can get and shape the oil industry in the way that it needs to be shaped, and that it will sort of deliver the revenue that they're hoping to sort of finance this operation, but also bring some dividends to the Americans and to the Venezuelans. The real sort of unknown factor is, and there's going to be a meeting on Friday, will the US oil companies decide that this is their chance to return to Venezuela? So far, things have seemingly been pretty calm and stable in Venezuela and in the cities. And that is the kind of stability that these companies are going to ask for in order for them to decide to actually go and start moving this oil. But the whole sort of complex, the oil will be seized and the US will take it, and then the US will then sell it on the international market. And then only from that, sale will they share monies with the native Venezuelans and with the US companies responsible. And so this is a new game plan, and it's very clear that the US is going to be there for a while.
Right. Okay. Just very briefly, James, because this is a 30-minute abridged program today, and we've only got about 30 seconds left. Let's just stay with Venezuela, because U.S. officials say Russia has sent a submarine to escort an empty oil tanker that's being pursued by U.S. forces who suspected of breaking Venezuelan oil sanctions. I wonder why the U.S. is determined to board this tanker and why Russia is worried, whilst we keep in mind that apparently the US, we're just learning now, has seized a second tanker connected to Venezuela in the Caribbean Sea.
Yeah, Charles, it's a really rapidly moving sort of situation down there and up in the North Atlantic. But Russia has moved its submarine, really trying to declare that despite what's going on in Ukraine, they still have the ability to propel power around the world. And the US is basically trying to rebuff all other actors, all other players within this Caribbean Western Hemisphere area, that this is the US domain. So these conflicts will continue. My hope is that there won't be loss of life, but the whole idea is for the US to be able to continue to declare that this is their space and everyone else should sort of go away and get out. And Russia wasn't willing to do that this afternoon.
James, thanks very much indeed. James Blue is our special correspondent. He was talking to me on the line there from New York.